So welcome today to our Measuring What Matters, using wellbeing data to drive organisational performance webinar that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Marion Hewitt. My name's Jo Thompson. I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Marion, who will introduce herself shortly. Marion is going to explain ways to measure both employee and workplace wellbeing that will contribute to your strategy. If you've got any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility. If we don't cover them during the event, we will cover them at the end. I'm now going to hand you over to Marion, who will introduce herself and start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just put my slides up so hopefully you can see them. Probably see so many in here. There's so much interest in that. I've been working with Jo doing sessions on a variety of topics for a good few years. I think we worked out, we've done sort of over 40 together. So it's great to be with you today. And my background is a lot of years within HR, always had an interest in wellbeing, particularly around the science of positive psychology and in relation to mental health and supporting mental health. But I want us to really be looking at wellbeing from that strategic perspective. And as people professionals, we know we should be looking at a data-driven approach. But as we'll discuss, actually measuring and understanding well-being is challenging. And I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to send you away with an immediate equation that's going to be able to give you an accurate measurement. What I actually would hope that we can do is to really think about what information we have and what we can use and how we can use it. My view of well-being in terms of it being at work is every element of our experience of work has the potential to impact our well-being. And if thinking about an example, if my job is well designed, if my workload is manageable, if my manager is clear about the expectations, if the technology works, then actually these will impact on my performance and my well-being. And a lack of those things will cause stress, anxiety, and have a negative impact on well-being. So what I'd like us to think about during this session is why measuring well-being matters, the fact we want to have that evidence-based, data-driven approach to developing our strategy, what we might be able to use to track it, and recognizing the complexity of how things interlink and how lots of things will influence one piece of data. We can't always say it's specifically linked to one element. And how we can use that data, draw on that data to drive change. So the starting point, and actually the first point of complexity, is what is well-being and how do we measure it? So just saying, no, the slides will be available afterwards, and I'll just, actually, there's a link. Let me just send you the link in the chat now. There you can download the checklist. That should have. Oh, it's not wanting to go while the screens are sharing. Okay, I'll do that in a minute. So what is well-being and how do we measure it? So some people will call well-being, some people will call it resilience, some people call it life satisfaction, some will call it happiness. And actually in the academic press, there is a whole debate about what it is, but actually decide that we just, from an organisational strategic perspective, well-being is basically about how people think and feel whilst they are at work. So having data around that helps us present a business case. It's right that we should be doing that. When we're looking at data, we also have to be mindful that data is often open to interpretation, bias, and it's not necessarily the way to give us that clear objective approach. You know, if we want to do something, we can often find some research that can support the viewpoint that we want. And actually what we need to make sure is we are collecting all data, so we are, you know, critically evaluating the data that we have. We want to use the information we've got to make sure that we are doing interventions in a targeted way. You know, we need to think in that broader strategic terms. So it could be what I think of as traditional intervention, that might be, you know, the healthy eating element, or it might be a redesign of an efficient process, actually makes workflow much easier, reduces stress, and gives more of an impact on somebody's well-being than sending them on a resilience workshop, although there's a value in both parts. We can also use it to identify any potential blind spots that we might have in strategy. What have we not recognized as being an issue? What is linked to something else? And we know that when we have that more clearer understanding of well-being, we will have engagement, retention, and productivity improvements. But so when we're looking at this data, we need to make sure that we are using it intelligently. If we think of the wider business case, because we can always draw on wider research for our internal strategy. So some data we have here. Deloitte research 56 billion per year is the cost of poor mental health estimated. Gallup, their research 23% higher profitability, 81% a lower absenteeism in organisations that had a good level of well-being. And then CIPD identified that strategic well-being led to better morale and engagement. A more recent, some research by McKinsey, just out quite recently, they identified or believe that enhanced employee well-being could generate up to 11.7 trillion in global economic value, which are mind-boggling numbers. This research, sorry, the graphs aren't that clear, but this is some really valuable recent research that's being carried out by the Wellbeing Research Centre at Oxford in conjunction with Indeed. So Indeed did the crowdsourcing. So the sample was over 20 million participants. So we've got a really comprehensive sample and data to draw on. But what they found was that where there was a clear link between employer happiness, well-being, and all those key, firm value, profitability, and overall profits. So reinforcing the strategic importance on well-being. And this graph here, you don't need to worry about not being able to see all of the detail clearly, but what you can see is the darker line, the top line, is the one when the research looked at all the data, the companies that came out within the top 100, as in though they had levels of data that was meaningful. So the top 100 companies across the whole sample, when they were compared to the performances of other organisations against stock market performance, they consistently came out better. So we are getting that broader evidence that shows there is a link between well-being, employee well-being, workplace well-being, and organisational performance. And these are looking at, profit, but actually performance can mean different things for different organisations. So what I'd like you to take the opportunity to do is to think about the different types of metrics that you have available, whether you're using them, how you're using them, and if there's scope for making greater use of them. So let's just think at an individual level to start with. Engagement scores. Now, engagement itself is one of those interesting elements. Gallup talk about the well-being engagement paradox, because actually engagement feeds into well-being. If people are engaged in their work, they have better well-being, but also if they're in a good place well-being wise, they are more engaged at work. So there is definitely that link, that reciprocal level. So at a basic level, engagement scores and surveys, which used to be the traditional way that organisations got a feel for people's level of engagement, they give us some level of indication of overall levels of well-being because of that link to that. But we're seeing that global engagement scores are reducing. The recent Gallup State of the Workplace report identified that it was down to 21%, down from 23%, and the UK is lagging behind that, with manager engagement levels described as crisis point down at 27%. So you're looking at what engagement scores have you got? Do you do an annual survey? What's it telling you? Are you utilising that data? as we know, doing any engagement survey and doing nothing with it actually does more to reduce engagement than anything. So think about, are you using the information you get from your engagement surveys to tell you more about what is working well for employees in terms of their well-being, and what are the detractors from their well-being? Then the next one is probably one of the most basic of the metrics that we would be using in organizations. Employee assistance program, sorry. So it's the most basic one. So are you actually using that data in a way that you interrogate it, not just as a way of managing individual cases? Absenteeism is about physical and psychological well-being. Spikes in absence could indicate stress-related issues, poor working conditions, or a lack of adequate support. Are you using it to spot trends, identify departments under particular strain, and then to implement timely interventions to support healthier attendance? So, not just collecting that data, but how are you really using it? Again, the data is conflicting. The ONS report shows that absence rate is at 2% and continuing to fall, and it's only slightly above pre-pandemic levels now. The CIPD figures put it at higher, but look at your absence. What's it telling you? Presenteeism is very challenging to actually measure, and there is some work, public policy research suggests that presenteeism cost organisations £103 billion in 2023. So that's when people come to work despite illness or stress and are performing below capacity. Notoriously hard to measure and can be difficult to detect. And, when is it? I mean, no, in my view, nobody ever comes to work and can work at 100% of their ability 100% of the time. So, I'll give you anything that's less than that is less than what we can fully do. But presenteeism is where somebody is actually too unwell and still feels they have to come in. So what's that telling us about culture? What's that telling us that would be useful in terms of, the things that are impacting that? We do have to be slightly wary of what that means, because we might have a cold and not feel great, but we're still able to come into work, and that bit's fine, but recognize we won't be able to work as well. And then if we think about mental illness, actually, if we can support somebody to stay in work whilst they are recovering, it will help their recovery, because we know the purpose of the importance of having purpose, having that sense of routine, having connection with other people will all be supportive of recovery, but would actually mean somebody's not working as well as they might be. So it's absolute. If somebody is really unwell, they should not be at work, but we need to try and understand, if people are at work and they're not feeling well, what are the things that are influencing that? What can that tell us in terms of well-being? And then employee assistance programs, you can use data from the usage that can tell you what are the trends. The average usage rate for organisations is 6 to 12%. It's not high, and 12% is high. Not many organisations get anywhere near that. And the challenge with investing in an employee assistance program, which will offer a range of, counselling, a load of resources, depending which ones that you have. The challenge with having an EAP is that very cost effective per person, but actually per use, they become a lot more expensive. So is it working well? How can you make it better? Data that shows a low uses may not mean that there aren't any issues in your organisation. It may be an indication that it's not being promoted well enough, or people don't understand what it actually includes. Or the other element that often the biggest barrier is people don't believe that it's confidential. And employee assistance program providers do not provide data, as you will know from being on the side of implementing in organisations. Any data that you get is very, very generic. And it's only larger organisations where anything would be anonymised that you might be able to get some understanding of trends if people were focusing on particular things. But generally, you would not get much specific data from it. But actually, what can you use in terms of its whether people are accessing it, and internal pulse surveys perhaps to what people are finding useful. So think about how you're using your EAP to get some data around wellbeing. And I've put one-to-ones in here because I think that's sort of qualitative data, if you like, rather than numerical data. But we get an awful lot from those conversations, and we could do it in a slightly more structured way. Historically, those conversations about how are you doing were the questions that came right at the end when people had run out of time and they'd done all the business bit. But how can we do those check-ins, how we can find out? And, we can get that more qualitative information. I know of organisations where they'll have a system. As a manager, I remember talking about who did monthly one-to-ones and would just sort of say to their team, where are you 1 to 10 today, wellbeing? And it was nothing, accurately scientifically measurable, but it kind of gave them a level of understanding, whether somebody was feeling better this month or whether things were challenging. But it just sort of gave a language where they could talk about how people were feeling and then encourage it. So, what are we getting as managers? What are we getting of information that's causing stress, creating anxiety, impacting resilience of employees within our areas? The mental health disclosures is one that we would have to be very, very sensitive in terms of what this data is and any ways we would collect it. It could be in relation to occupational health assessments. It could be data from your absence reporting. It could be things from how many times, perhaps if you've got mental health first aiders, how many conversations they're having, being absolutely clear that it's not about ever breaching any confidentiality in any disclosures. It's about, are we aware that there are lots of conversations happening? Is that giving us a feeling that there are challenges around there? Because we know, approximately 1 in 6 workers experience mental health problems at any given time. So we are always going to be, we're not going to be experts anyway. We're not going to be diagnosing. We don't have that clinical expertise unless you do. So it's really about that self-reporting, the sickness, absence, the one-to-ones. But again, they're indicators as to whether people are feeling resilient, where their main well-being is feeling. So think about that. I'm just going to take the slides down for a minute so to see if that will then let me share the link to download the checklist I was trying to do earlier. No, for some reason it's not letting me do it, Jack.
I'll see if I can attach it, Marion.
Okay, thank you. So let's go up and think about the things in people's immediate work environment. We know we have that duty of care to provide an environment that protects the health, safety and well-being of employees, and it's a mutual requirement. We have to report, we have to collect accident reports, we have to do the RIDDOR reporting if necessary. And this information, again, is it cause or is it effect? If somebody's well-being is compromised, they are likely to be distracted, they won't focus as well, they are more likely to have accidents. I'm sure we can all think at some level of something that's gone wrong when we haven't been focusing. And obviously, depending on the sector and the industry you're in, those things are more significant than others. But actually, what are the reports that we're getting? What is it telling us? Are there increases of accidents? Are there particular areas that are getting them? What about any data you might collect on near misses, things that the incidents rather than the actual accidents? What is the data that you've got there telling us? Any rising incidence rates could be an indicator of declining well-being. If someone's not feeling well or engaged, accidents are more likely to happen. So, how are you using those reports? How are you collating with others in your organisation? If you have any specialists in that can add to your data. there are questions, things I'll can look at those later. Return to work support processes. This is the simplest but most effective way of collecting meaningful information. And return to work interviews, as you're all aware, are the most effective ways of managing absence. People that have been off unwell will feel supported and will have a smoother transition to work. And as the proactive response to managing absence, if people may not have been as unwell, then they are less likely to do it, to be absent if they know they will have the meeting. So it is a really important thing to keep in. But actually, how are you tracking those return to work processes? What things are coming to light through those? How effectively are you supporting? Are people going off again? Are you managing to transition people smoothly back in, particularly after long-term illness? So having that structured intervention actually increases retention by about 20% after long-term illness. And obviously, we know, particularly in times and areas of skill shortages and challenges, we want to be retaining the skills and talents within our organisation. So how are you collecting that? How are you using that information? What's it telling you? And then when you are putting in place a wellbeing initiative, and that might be a specific activity or program, which is something that's usually voluntary, so it might be a challenge of something, or it might be offering a workshop, or it might be a benefit such as a subsidized gym. So what sort of level of participation are you getting? You know, you'll generally get something that will be higher at the beginning, and it is likely to tail off. It can be linked to whether there's any incentives involved in it, you know, perhaps a financial reduction for doing it, you know, reduced for a gym membership or something, whether it's tailored. What we have to be mindful of is, are those initiatives ones that actually are inclusive? Are they accessible to people? Now, not every initiative you offer is going to be appropriate to everybody, which is okay, but you've got to make sure that you can give sufficient, you can give an array of things so the different needs of people are met. Be mindful of sort of where there's a level of cynicism amongst some employees, where that sort of the well-being washing comes in. I was thinking of conversation a while ago with somebody, paramedic, and it was, you know, I knew that their HR team were doing everything they can. They've got a load of things going in the well-being area, but actually they were challenged because when you talk to the frontline staff, actually what they needed was to be able to finish on time and be able to have their meal breaks, which were much wider system issues that they weren't going to be able to address. But how you can be working together with all of these things. So, you know, again, what's your data telling us? Is a high level showing that actually that's meeting a need, and what's creating that need behind that? And you know, what's missing? If something hasn't been taken up, is it because it didn't meet a need, the need wasn't there, or was it not being shared in a way that was valuable to people? And then the work-life balance. I've put that work-life balance sentiment because actually I think this is such an individual and a personal thing. And to me, it is about how the different areas of our world fit together. It's not just about work and just about life. There's lots of different components in that. But actually, you know, the common wisdom kind of presents work-life balance as this state of nirvana when all our parts of our world fit nicely together and everything is good. But in reality, it's complex, it's variable, it's individual. But ultimately, it's about the employee's perception as to whether they have the best balance, and what works for one will be not the same for the other. So actually, you know, asking them that. But actually, you know, employees who are consistently working overtime or struggling to disconnect, and, you know, they can then have result in chronic stress. So what are their indicators in the organisation that suggest that the balance isn't right? One of the additional things here, I think, is also about, you know, what's the organisational responsibility? and what's the employee responsibility? Because I do believe as employees, we have an individual responsibility and ownership for some of those things that enable that work-life balance. You know, we shouldn't be checking emails at 10 o'clock at night, but then if we're a manager, we certainly shouldn't be sending them at 10 o'clock at night. So, you know, how are those behaviours and the ownership feeding in to being able to get that balance right? CIPD, their last research, it's only 46% of workers feel they have a good balance. But actually, we know that, you know, that having access to flexible working, the importance of well-being is increasing with people. I do assessments for CIPD students, and it's felt like over the last 5 years, whatever the question is, the answer is work-life balance and hybrid working. And there is a lot to be said for that, but we just have to, you know, dig around to see what it's really telling us. So think about that part. Sure, I can see there are questions and things coming, but I'll come back to that to them afterwards. So then we've got wider thing. I mean, some of them you could talk about workplace or organisation. There's a bit of an overlap, but just really to encourage the thinking and for you to look at the data you might be able to have. So turnover retention, that will be influenced by many things. You know, it's not just linked to well-being. However, we do know that some recent research has shown that 54% of organisations would rule out an employer who lacked visible wellbeing support. And certainly, you know, if you look on career pages of websites, wellbeing is frequently, you know, really promoted. 87% of candidates looking for jobs want flexibility. So thinking about, you know, high turnover may suggest wellbeing challenges. But actually, what do you mean by wellbeing challenge? Because actually poor leadership or overwhelm of workload, lack of progression opportunities, they on one level could be considered wellbeing, another level they're not, because they will impact somebody's wellbeing, although obviously it's a wider thing. If somebody is not getting the opportunity to grow, to learn, that impacts psychological wellbeing. If they're constantly in a state of overwhelm, that is obviously going to affect well-being and likely to lead to retention problems. So, you know, what is your data telling you? And actually, are you using information on, you know, we have exit interviews, but how many of you carry out stay interviews? You know, those employees that are there, that are solid, reliable part of your workforce. What are you doing that, in terms of asking them of, you know, what makes you like being here? What helps you stay here? What's important to you about the culture and the organisation? So think about that. Pulse survey wellbeing scores being used increasingly. It kind of aligns with wider society, you know, lots of quick response, instant data. But actually, where there's a real value from our perspective is we can get much more that real-time information. If you try something new or a change is going through, you can do those pulse checks. So they are particularly valued during times of uncertainty and change to help you see where you need to target. You know, the feedback is rapid and it helps you to make the response. And it is obviously an increasing trend for organisations away from those annual surveys, but it doesn't have to be an either or. Looking at your wider business performance, and this is often an area that is not used enough. How are we looking at other information in the organisation that will be influenced by employees' well-being? You know, the net promoter scores will be linked to somebody's experience in all elements of their work. Their your customer feedback will be influenced by how well the level of customer service somebody gets, and the level they can give will be influenced on how they feel at work. So what are you doing in terms of looking at your wider business KPIs? How are you using those in relation to your well-being data? What is it telling you? And then benchmarking is also important. It helps you know whether your strategy is working compared to perhaps other organisations. It's really useful to get real comparative data. You know, some sectors have inherently a higher turnover than others, but within those sectors, you'll see organisations that really buck those trends. So look at what you're doing, look at how you can perform with similar organisations, and then identify ways you can do things even better. And remembering in that time of, you know, challenging labour market skill shortages, actually, you know, those are the things that will help differentiate us as an organisation. So think about a lot of sectors, you'll have your own source for detailed benchmarking. There are some wider HR, you know, CIPD have them sort of absence rates, but you want broader perspective, I think, into for your own sector. So if we have data, how are we going to use it? It's all very well collecting information. We can collect statistics and they might be interesting, but actually they only become valuable if we are utilising them to develop our strategy, to make smaller. This doesn't all have to be about a big strategic approach. Sometimes it can be those small changes or that communication or that intervention or that process change we can make that actually will have a big difference. So what is the data telling you? How does it link to other data? You know, no element that we've looked at here can be looked at in isolation, but actually recognizing that. What might we be missing? What might we not have thought of in terms of that? How could we break it down further? How does that data vary across departments or roles or the different demographics? What might be influencing the accuracy of it? You know, are people feeling able to talk openly? When will we be collecting that data? You know, how somebody feels at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning compared to 4 o'clock in an afternoon on a Friday afternoon. It's, you know, one level that sounds a bit trivial, but it will impact how we are feeling in response to something. So, you know, look at all that. How useful will this data be? Really critically analyze it. And how can we use this for any insights? So what next? What would I be encouraging you to do as an outcome of, you know, thank you already having invested time in joining us now, but it's only going to be time well invested if you then use the things that we've been talking about. So look at where you can collect data. You will undoubtedly already be doing some things. You may have systems already in place. There's a wellbeing metrics checklist I produced quite recently that's available. Joe put the link in. You should probably do it again. That just gives you a starting point. And what I would really encourage you to do is using it to audit what is currently happening. And it's not an exhaustive list. You may well have other things that are, you know, particularly relevant to your organisation that you want to bring into it. Invite others into the conversation. You know, well-being isn't an HR responsibility. Well-being is an organisational wide responsibility. So where else can you get insights? Who can you involve in the discussions? It might be trying to dig deeper into the data or to get greater depths, you know, of insight from some particular intervention that you've done, or it could be about the broader conversations. But we shouldn't be trying to address well-being in an HR silo. If we want it to be a strategic part of the organisation, then we need to work with the organisation. You know, 87% of managers believe that well-being gives competitive advantage. But alongside that, only half said that it was actually being used as a strategic priority. So as we're getting data that shows actually we really need to invest in supporting both employee and workplace well-being, we need to make that integral to the wider strategy and not just a nice to have element of the people strategy. So think about using the data that you've got, how it can then be used to inform your wider strategy. And a lot of this doesn't actually have to come under the well-being heading, because a lot of these things are actually part of wider people strategy, people practice that have the outcome of having a positive impact on well-being. So if you go back to my original thing, you know, every touch point of our experience at work has the potential to have a positive or negative impact on our individual well-being. So if you have that in the back of your mind, every change, every system, every policy, every process, the basic things, they will be part of looking at your overall well-being. So my aim really is to encourage you to think, to analyse, to question, to collate, and use that to help you inform. So I'm just going to do the next slide, just to remind you the wider stuff that I do, and then I'll take the slides down for questions. So I do quite a lot of work with leadership teams, helping them look at their strategic approach to wellbeing, looking at where they are, where they want to get to, do mental health first aid and wider mental health awareness training, range of webinars and linked with a particular positive psychology focus. And then Unleashing You is my wider program. So there's more information you can find about that on my website, and you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. But for now, let me take that down and see what questions have come up.
I can only see the one, Marion.
Okay.
Can you give me ideas for return to work processes, apart from a return to work meeting?
I mean, no, I was looking more at sort of the data, the processes. It is about those phased returns. It's about making sure people are up to date on changes that are happening. It's about, depending what it is, how you understand if somebody's finding it difficult back at work, what would be the signs we would be looking for, making sure it's not just a one-off meeting on the first day back and then everybody expects everything back to normal, that it's an ongoing process. If somebody's just been off for something relatively minor for a week and they're back, then that's probably all that's needed. But if somebody's been off for a long term, then actually we want to support them to sort of ease back into work, because it's amazing how much changes, when we're, just you go on holiday for a couple of weeks and things change. So, how you are really setting somebody up for success when they come back. I think somebody's got...
There's another question just gone up, Marion.
Wellbeing initiatives. I think it depends very much on the organisation, the demographics, where people are based, what their role is. So I'm not sure I would particularly highlight anything in particular. And I think whilst there is definitely a place for initiatives, things like, workshops around building resilience and understanding stress. But then it could be, having access to an app and doing a challenge and having sort of competitions between teams. It could be, that are linked to health. It could be a volunteering opportunity, because there's lots of benefits with volunteering. So I would all count those under there. Right, so we're getting lots of questions now. Productivity linked to wellbeing. Productivity. Sorry, more questions coming in too quickly. Positivity linked wellbeing to the organisation. Any specific ways to measure this too? I mean, it depends on your organisation how you measure productivity. As in, some you can level production, but actually often it's people's individual assessment of how, sometimes we know we've been really focused and really productive. But I can't think of any particular ways that I would suggest you would be measuring. I mean, it's about outputs ultimately, isn't it? Is somebody producing what you would expect? But are you talking quantity? Are you thinking quality? Are you talking problem solving? So I think it depends very much on the roles. Best ways to encourage the SL to be more engaged. Yes, because actually if you're bringing in initiatives, you need that SLT buy-in, but actually in a way that's what all this is about, because the SLT will be talking in numbers, and they need to. We can't, however passionate we are about well-being, we actually have to recognize there has to be a business case for it, and actually this is what all of this is about. What particularly that wider, I would certainly recommend you go back and look at the Oxford Wellbeing Root Centre, Wellbeing Centre. They've got a huge amount of stuff and really that. But actually I think the way I always think about it, we're trying to influence, what's keeping your CFO and your managing director, whatever your language is, finance director, what's keeping them awake at night? What are their key challenges? And then actually, what do we need? How are there links that we can be suggesting that are enabling employees to work at their best that then help meet those? And there will be a link somewhere. And remember, a lot of these things don't cost money. I think that's where we have wellbeing on a separate post, in a separate pot, and it gets a budget that gets pulled if things get tight. Whereas actually so much of it is about the way we experience work and the culture, the values. What else have we got? Sometimes the underdog is not revenue centre. Yes. So the financial value of it, I think this is really the outcome of all of this. Actually, we create data, we have metrics, we show where there are issues and why this would be helping. Looking at a job redesign, looking at a change in scheduling, looking at a revised system, actually that will have a positive impact on stress levels, and you can demonstrate that 60% of absences are linked to stress. So all those sorts of things. I think that critically analyze and interrogate the data you've got, and it doesn't just have to be numbers. Remember, qualitative data, information that people share is data as well. So be that. The most effective way, I think it's really understanding. You have to sort of adapt the language to talk in the way that people understand. So, absence and retention are metrics that are commonly used and frequently understood. So in a way, our specialism and our expertise is around digging under that as to what we can do from the wellbeing perspective, separating employer and time to go into all the difference between workplace well-being and employee well-being. There are different drivers and different outcomes. So there's so much I could cover, and I'm just sort of trying to keep to the key bit of the topic. But actually speak the language that your SLT is talking in terms of what are the challenges, and then look at how can I then influence my way through this to actually get, it's about getting the best outcomes for the organization. It's not about just trying to get your way. It's about actually, we have the evidence that shows if we are supporting employees and enabling their well-being, these business metrics will benefit. So go back and look at that Indeed research, because that's a pretty comprehensive supply. It's ongoing. Any other questions? I hope I've answered most of those. I think somebody's got their hand up, but I don't know who. I can't see that. And if you have, perhaps just put the question in the.
There's probably just the last question. If a person would like to work particularly on corporate wellbeing, what sort of roles can you suggest that? Sorry, what roles can suggest that?
I think that should be possibly more yours, but I think it depends on the size of the organisation, because I mean, a generalist HR role, wellbeing usually comes within it, and then if you're in a much wider corporate setting, there will be specific wellbeing roles, but it's really just digging around what's out there. I mean, there's not a huge number of very specialist wellbeing roles within organisations, unless you're looking at some of the much bigger NHS trusts or big corporates. But the generalist HR roles, the business partnering roles, they'll all incorporate well-being. And to me, because well-being influences everything about our experience of work, then ultimately everything is about well-being, which sounds very simplistic, but there's a lot there is in there. So yeah, I've put up that I've got various things that I can share with you, but if you request the checklist, then I can send you that, and then I've got some other things that I can follow up. There's a wider questionnaire about understanding where your organisation is. But I really hope I've given you food for thought as much as anything. And part of it is, we haven't got instant answers. There is not a very clear, cause and effect. There'll be a correlation and an interlink. So, interrogate, analyze, question your data. What else have you got available? How can you use it? And how can this inform your strategy and ideas going forward? So I really hope you found it useful. Thank you so much for making the time to come, and hopefully we'll see you at another session. Take care.
We'll send out some correspondence to everyone that's signed up for the event this afternoon, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the follow-up information, if you've not downloaded it already, or the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on Thursday, the 7th of August, and is called Chairing a Disciplinary Hearing. A link to sign up for that will be included in the email. If anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit, exec recruit, and charity recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to you, Marion, for putting the event together, and to everyone for tuning in. Thank you.